So we move on to another different session. It is something to do with climate change. And this is to climate change, adapting to climate change implications for human health. We have Harsha as our speaker, and we have Dr. A.R. Chaudhary, who would be chairing the session. I request Dr. A.R. Chaudhary to introduce Harsha.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
Dr. Harsha Minawat is talking on a very new topic, that is energy, pollution and health. And she is a senior specialist in energy matter and World Resource Institute. She is in Singapore, I think. So I think this is a new topic and we will be enlightened by Dr. Harsha Minawat. Harsha Minawat, please.
Good evening and thank you very much for the introduction, sir. Can someone please confirm if my slides are visible?
Yes, you are visible.
And I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yes, very clear.
Okay. Let me just change this. Right. So today I'm going to speak about a topic which relates to the medical fraternity, although not very directly. And I'm going to talk about adapting to climate change and the implications for human health that are there. The outline for today's discussion is that I'll talk about the definition of climate change and what it is and what the sorry, I seem to have some issues with.
Click on the slide and it will move.
Okay. All right. So is that, can you see the next slide?
Yes.
Okay. So the outline for today's discussion is talking about what do we mean by climate change, what are the causes of climate change, what are the impacts of climate change, and how can we mitigate climate change, and then finally talking about what are the implications of human health and the actions that the fraternity can take. So let's try and define what climate change is. Climate change is the so we define climate as the average weather in a place over many years. And so by that definition, climate change is a shift in those average conditions. So climate change has actually happened before in past eras, and the most notable being the ice ages, where which actually have been a subject of a very few successful animated movies. If you remember the movie called Ice Age. And ever since human civilization came about, we have also been obsessed with weather. And so it is natural that we have noticed and studied it in great depth and the ongoing shift in weather conditions. So based on the trends of temperature from 1850s to now, we infer that the Earth is now in a period of rapid climate change, with global temperatures rising because of human activities, such as the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. Scientists have been able to simulate what global average temperature trends would have been if humans did not exist. So this line, if you can see the bottom line, the blue line, actually talks about if humans did not exist in the past 2000, in the past since the past millennia, what would be the temperatures, global average temperatures of the planet. And the other blue line, the red line that you see on top is what it means that is what it shows that this is a simulated effect of what is the impact of human and natural factors combined. So if humans did not exist, and if we compare that with the actual observed trends of global average temperature, you will see in this graph the trends of simulation and observed trends diverge from each other very significantly by 1970s or so. And so we are currently, as you will notice, at about 1.2 degrees Celsius of average global temperature increase relative to the 1950s. So if in 1950s we were at about the same as 1850s, we have moved 1.2 degrees of heating of global warming. So if climate change has happened before, when humans were not around, what is causing climate change now? So the answer is the greenhouse effect. So the sun is our primary energy source, and some of the incoming sunlight is reflected directly back into space. The rest is absorbed by the surface and the atmosphere of the planet. Much of this absorbed solar energy is re-emitted as heat, either long wave or infrared radiation. And the atmosphere in turn absorbs and re-radiates some of which escapes to space. And any disturbance to this balance of incoming and outgoing energy will affect the Earth's climate. So greenhouse gases include water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and these are the gases that absorb heat energy and they emit it in all directions, and they emit it including downwards. This actually keeps the Earth's surface and the lower atmosphere warm enough, and this is what actually makes our planet habitable as compared to Mars or as compared to any other planet. But recent trends in these greenhouse emissions are leading to warming, which can turn this hospitable climate to a very hostile planet. The historical trends of GHG emissions show that in 1850, the world emitted approximately 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, which increased to about 11 gigatons in about 1950s. And by 2018, we were emitting 48 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So this is a very stark increase, especially if you compare it to what the planet was probably emitting while before the industrial age came about. And because of the greenhouse gas effect, these greenhouse gases don't dissipate in the atmosphere. Instead, these gases accumulate, causing more and more warming of the planet. Some of them get absorbed by forests and some of them get absorbed by the ocean, but almost 50% of what we emit gets concentrated in the atmosphere, causing global warming. As of 2019, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere was about 412 parts per million, and it is a rising trend. There is no sight of reduction in this trend so far. So what does climate change actually look like in practical purposes? We know for sure that the Earth is warming, and we know for sure that we have caused it. But what does it mean for us and the planet? It means that the global average temperature will increase over time. So as you can see, at 1 degree global warming, this is what a thermal imaging of a planet looks like. At 1.5 degree, this is what it looks like. At 2 degrees, this is what it will look like. And at 4 degree rise, this is what the planet will look like in thermal imaging. So our climate system will change in several ways and possibly in irrevocable ways, like there are irreversible ways that the planet will change. And mainly, it will lead to an increase in the frequency and intensity of hot extremes. It will lead to marine heat waves, and it will lead to heavy precipitations. It will lead to agricultural and ecological droughts in some regions. It will lead to intense tropical cyclones in other regions. And most obviously, it will lead to reduction in the Arctic ice and snow cover and the permafrost that already exists at the top of our world. The main point that I want to drive here is that all of these changes are going to be erratic. It is very difficult to predict that this area will receive more heat, will receive heat waves. This area will receive more precipitation or rainfall, and this place is going to have more tropical cyclones, for example. So even in 2021, we have seen several extreme events due to climate change. So we have seen record-breaking heat waves in Canada and northern USA. We've seen deadly floods in Europe, especially in Germany and also in China. We've seen wildfires in California, Italy, Greece. We've seen record-breaking snowfall in Spain. There was a cyclone in Fiji. There was a winter storm in Texas. Even the Indian monsoons, upon which our whole economy depends. As of now, as of 25th of August, 1/3 of all districts report deficient or largely deficient rainfall. And even when there was normal or surplus rainfall in any of the districts in India, it was not spread out across the whole monsoon season. Instead, it poured within a few days or even a few hours, and the rest of the season was probably just dry. These are events only from 2021, and the year is not even over yet. So scientists have set a temperature increase of 1.5 degrees as the safe limit for global warming. Like we saw earlier in the graph, that we are right now at 1.2 degrees Celsius as of 2020. If temperatures go higher, damaging changes will happen to the natural environment, and this will probably transform the collective way of the way that we know of living, the way that the 21st century knows of living. So many scientists believe that this will happen, and they are predicting that temperatures will actually rise to 3 degrees Celsius or even more by the end of the century, that is 2100. Now that climate change as a phenomenon and the science and is behind it is actually getting clearer, countries have started to come together to try and resolve this issue. So since we understand that fossil fuel use is the main contributor of greenhouse gas emissions, countries have pledged to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions through targeted policies. In the global political parlance, these are known as intended nationally determined contributions, which countries set for themselves, and they committed to them in the very famous meeting that happened in Paris. It's called the Paris Agreement that happened in 2015. So as we can see from this figure, energy production for fossil fuels contributes 73% of GHG emissions. Several countries are working towards generating electricity from solar and wind instead of coal and gas. As is India, we have such a large renewable energy target, and we can see solar plants coming up in many locations across the country. And similarly, countries are adopting targets to use more electric vehicles so that emissions from transport can reduce. So we can reduce the consumption of petroleum products, for example. And countries are also setting themselves afforestation targets so that they can improve their green cover, and similar policies are being implemented throughout the world. Many countries are adopting policies or targets that would reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by, let's say, 2040, 2050, 2060 in the case of China. This means that any emission would be balanced out by absorbing an equivalent amount through planting trees, for example, or investing more in renewable energy generation for electricity. So the hope is that this will stave off the most dangerous effects of climate change, and we will arrest the rapid rise in temperature. So we won't reach, let's say, 4 degrees if all the countries, not just the colored ones here, but even all the gray countries have some sort of targets for climate mitigation. We will probably stave off the worst effects of climate change. But realistically, even if we implement all the currently announced policies, the best case scenario, according to studies, for average global temperature is an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, the border of the safe limit. And as the negotiations for climate mitigation have been ongoing since 25 years, the global consensus on climate action is very, very important, although it seems very, very unlikely because there is a lot of politics involved in this. So what does this mean for human health? It means that while mitigation action is being discussed in meetings, in conferences, the upcoming one being in the UK, people around the world are already bearing the brunt of extreme climate events. Like the list I shared with you earlier, that is the list of only the events that happened in 2021, but there are way too many events that are being felt, the impacts of all across the world in different contexts. So there are several pathways through which climate change can affect human health. So health effects from climate change will be because of altered temperatures, extreme precipitation and rainfall, and then there would be floods and droughts because of it. there would be air pollution, and there would be infectious diseases because of that. But there are pathways that we understand already, which climate change will through which climate change will affect human health, and that can be seen through regional weather changes. So these weather changes can affect microbial contamination pathways. Sorry, just a second. Yes, so these weather changes can affect microbial contamination pathways and their transmission dynamics. These changes can affect agroecological systems and hydrological regions. These can affect the socio-economic conditions and demographics of a region. You know, as people get affected by floods, they have to migrate from one place or the other, and so it's not very easy for people to be able to cope with all of the changes that are happening. And this will result in health effects. So there would be temperature-related illnesses and deaths. There could be extreme weather-related health effects. There would be air pollution-related health effects, waterborne and foodborne diseases, most starkly vector-borne and rodent-borne diseases. And there would be effects of food and water shortages, especially on nutrition, especially on mental health, and also on infectious and other diseases. So although the risk, you know, if we only look at these health effects, we might think that the risk is quite low as compared to the current acute health crisis that we are going through right now, and also the great burden of disease that we already have because of non-communicable diseases. But the attributable burden of a widespread global phenomenon will be quite high. Any region or population with concurrent environmental or socioeconomic stresses will be at risk. So, for example, if a region tends in a year tends to have droughts, and then tends to have in the next year tends to have extreme rainfall, then you know the systems that are already in place are not really are not going to be able to meet the needs of both these challenges, because you know the resources available for management of health system is very limited. So what we need is long-term disease surveillance, so that we can identify suspected hotspots and we can manage the health risks and detect the health risks that are in these situations and prevent these diseases that can be there. So for example, for vector ecology, malaria, dengue, encephalitis, hantavirus, all of these are going to increase in certain hotspots, whereas respiratory, allergy, asthma are going to increase in some other hotspots. Of course, nobody is saying that both these hotspots will not be the same place. They could be the same place. But then there are decisions that need to be made on public health policies and public health resources that can address all of these challenges simultaneously. The health risks and impacts of climate change are not equally or fairly distributed across people, either across people or across communities or across nations. So we know for a fact that some of the smallest and least developed countries are bearing the largest and most harmful burden of climate change, despite the fact that they did not contribute to climate change as a whole. The main contributors of GHG emissions have been industrialized nations, have been Western economies. But climate change represents one of the greatest environmental and health equity challenges of our times. So wealthy energy consuming nations are most responsible for global warming, yet poor countries are most at risk. So if there are existing inequities in health service, climate change will exacerbate these inequities. Clinicians need to recognize these factors. So physicians need to identify and reduce health inequities in the way that they practice medicine. What are health inequities? These are preventable differences in health outcomes that are a result of systemic, avoidable, and unjust social and economic policies and systems that create barriers to health resources and opportunities. So there could be pre-existing health statuses that affect the way climate change affects people. There could be living and working conditions that physicians need to take into account. And the people also need to be aware that there are imbalances in power, and there are imbalances in terms of how people are able to affect policy and actually participate in governance processes. So while populations get exposed to the various regional weather changes, there are also factors that affect vulnerability of a population to be affected by climate change. So on the individual phase, the disease status of a particular individual will affect how they get affected by climate change. Those with pre-existing cardiovascular diseases, for example, will be more vulnerable to direct effects such as heat waves. We know for a fact that poor people are in general more vulnerable to health conditions. We know that the elderly are more vulnerable to heat waves. Infants are more vulnerable to diarrheal diseases. So these are all individual factors that should be taken into account. On the community aspect, we know that the integrity of water and sanitation systems and their capacity will affect how communities come back from a particular extreme event. Like say, for example, floods. The community level local food supply or distribution systems will affect what is the access of nutrition to people in these communities. Community level vector-borne diseases control programs are going to decide what will be the number of cases and what will be the number of deaths that happen in a particular community because of vector-borne diseases. And if there is enough access of information or not. So, for example, if there are early warning systems for floods or for landslides, etc., or for earthquakes, etc., so then only people will have that information to be able to act accordingly. Otherwise, they will be caught unawares. In terms of exposure, in terms of geographical factors, there is an exposure to extreme events which will exacerbate people's propensity to fall sick. The altitude that people live at, or the proximity of low-lying areas that can be affected because of sea level rise is going to decide what sort of propensity people have to fall sick. Our communities or certain geographies have more proximity to high-risk disease areas? Like, for example, we know from the COVID pandemic that communities that live closer to areas that have forests are more susceptible to getting affected by diseases that could be of zoonotic nature. And then areas with limited access to healthcare are also going to be is also going to decide what sort of diseases people are affected by. So rural residents, for example, often have less access to adequate healthcare. Urban residents, for example, are more vulnerable to air pollution and heat island effects. So the way that we approach both these areas and the diseases that affect them are also going to be different. And finally, environmentally degraded areas are also more vulnerable to extreme events. So what actions can we take? So some actions we know that can be taken by the medical community are to advocate for policies and system changes that can promote healthy living and working environments. So not exactly prescriptive activity, but more how to reduce risks for people. So if there is an opportunity, medical community should participate in policies that affect walking, that affect biking, that affect infrastructure for urban greenery or for zoning. Medical community should be assessing patient risks and connect patients with community resources that can actually address these issues that arise for them. For example, if there are heat vulnerable patients, then they can be referred to programs that reduce electricity costs, for example, so that they can actually use some air conditioning by reducing their electricity costs. We can also support policies and programs in the community and in the health system that can engage and partner with community residents, because this is a problem that is actually going to affect them, but probably they don't understand all the details about climate change and how it affects them. So more policy, more support towards engagement, more support towards awareness creation is required. And finally, it's important to learn about the community climate vulnerability of the areas where the medical fraternity actually is, the medical practitioners actually are. So as medical practitioners, if we are able to learn about our community vulnerability, and we are able to advocate for changes to reduce risks, for example, participating in planting trees for microclimate improvement, or using cool roofs or any other such activities that could also be of much help. So with this, I conclude my presentation, and the message that I would like to leave you all today is that our climate is changing. There is no doubt about it, and everyone will feel the impacts of it. And despite our best efforts on mitigation, on discussion about reducing our GHG emissions, global average temperatures will rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius minimum. And everyone has a role to play, either to mitigate the impacts of climate change or to help people to adapt to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsha. It was something which was really different than what we have been discussing right from the morning. But you have really opened our eyes. And I think every single person requires to contribute to prevent this disaster which is going to happen. It will be more dangerous than COVID even. Thank you for just giving us an inkling that what people should do. And I wish such things should be done on a bigger platform so that people can really understand what is going to happen. Dr. Chaudhary, if there are any questions, please go ahead. Dr. A.R. Chaudhary. Is Dr. Chaudhary there?
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are, sir.
No, my question is how it will be different, temperature rise, how will it be different in cold countries and hot countries, and how the people of hot countries have acclimatized to very high temperature as compared to the cold country people. So I think we have got mechanism of acclimatizing which may be different in cold countries and hot countries. So can you elaborate on this line?
Sure. Let me give an example. Canada, as we know, is a very cold country.
Yes.
Canada this year, and along with southern parts of the United States, the ones that are across the Canada-US border, all of those states faced the worst heat wave that they faced in all of time, in all of recorded time. So what we are as climate scientists, what is being said is that there is going to be erratic changes in weather. We will not be able to predict whether next year you will have a heat wave or you will not have a heat wave. In terms of adaptation, it becomes very difficult. So while, let's say, for example, people in Rajasthan in India tend to be able to manage high temperatures, even those temperatures about 40 degrees, 42 degrees is something that you can manage. But what happens when temperatures go to 47 degrees, which probably people in Qatar are able to manage, but people in Rajasthan might not be able to manage. Even a few degrees can mean patients coming to emergency to avail emergency services because of heat stroke and things like that. So there is going to be more pressure on the health ecosystem as a whole because we are not able to predict what is going to happen in the coming few months. So we can take some precautions, and those will be there for certain, for certain scales for some degrees of measure. But if things go to extreme events, we will not be able to take as much action as we'd like to. That answers your question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harsha. You have been very informative, and I think it's very eye-opening. Everybody will have to, in fact, brood and really think about doing something to contribute to prevent such a disaster happening. Thank you very much for the time you have given us. Thank you very much.